the first Exit 12 tour that we went on was to Eastern Kentucky University, and we're performing as part of, I believe it was the first Military in the Arts Symposium. So this is the first time Exit 12 was performing for primarily the military community, veterans and those who knew war in a very intimate way. After that performance, I remember there was this woman who commented about watching a performance, and she was moved in a way that it occurred to her that she should revisit her journals that she wrote while she was deployed. And that was something that she had yet to do since she had returned home. Also at EKU, that was the first time we had a veterans workshop. Going into this workshop setting to work with veterans, we were encountering another community that sometimes can be very all military experiences. They all go over there. Dancers all over here. I've got to say, before going into it, I was quite apprehensive. And through movement in this workshop, it was the first time I discovered, wait, movement can be used as that connection. Before we created Aggressed and This Is War, or actually at the beginning stages of creating those works. And in my group, I was working with Michael Day. I remember being so hung up on creating movement that had a lot of artistic merit is what I was going for. I wanted it to be special. And I remember watching Michael Day, and his choice at that point was a simple movement of stepping over someone else and moving his arm. And I was struck by how interesting that alone could be.
Perhaps the most profound experience I had with veterans is just over a year ago. It was one of the last tours I did with Exit 12. We were in DC, and Román was leading a workshop with Gold Star families who had lost loved ones, family members to war. We were divided into groups, and so I was with two older women and a man, and we were asked to create a short movement phrase that honored someone in our life. I think that was the prompt. I remember again in that moment, I did make something movement-wise, and I remember again feeling very small in the sense that what am I bringing to offer in this situation as compared to people that have had profound and difficult experiences that I have not experienced. But we were asked to share those movement phrases with our group. Both women had lost their sons, and so they were their movement sort of tributes were more in line with how they remember that person to be and what their qualities were and how they felt about them. The gentleman's phrase was sort of more of a reenactment of how his friend was shot down in a boat next to him. It was difficult. It was emotional. It still is emotional. Like, I don't know. That's the memory that stands out the most to me, because it feels like whenever it comes back to my mind, I still get emotional about it. But it was so beautiful in that specific exchange. They were so fearless and willing in that moment to share whatever they felt and saying that was important. And therefore, it was, but therefore they were unafraid. I think that simple movement can be incredibly effective when given the right level of care and intention. And in that moment, seeing the care and the intention and the consistency and the devotion that was given to the movement as a way of honoring their people was tremendously impactful. And so we shared our movement with each other, and we learned each other's movement, and we cried together. And it was a tremendous moment. And I carry that with me now significantly. I remember them and like what, as a day, it's not just a pool and a party day. It's a day of remembrance and honor. And it definitely, that changed my experience of the world.
Everett's been around Exit 12 for quite some time. I remember one of his earlier workshops, and Román likes to tell the story of him saying he wasn't going to show up, and then he did, but he also kind of checked in at every 5-minute interval saying, I'm closer, but I'm not actually going to come. We had a show where we did just the quartet of Conflicted, and he read a poem about being a baby killer in the Vietnam War, and I just remember how incredibly powerful that was, and also like terrifying to hear, and so raw. And since then, he sort of told me about, for him, art, like now that he's realized that this is what it takes for him, it's the words have to come out. It's sort of, he has to exercise the devil out of himself, and I feel like that's sort of how dance feels to me in a lot of ways, where it's sort of, I need to dance this out. I have to get this out of my mind, out of my spirit, into my body, so that it's almost another thing rather than sort of eating away at me. And I also found it really interesting to talk to him this most recent time about, he took a really long time to identify as a veteran. He's a Vietnam War vet, but he's only really identified as a veteran for the last decade. He was told at a workshop, like, you're a veteran. And he was kind of like, oh, I guess I am a veteran. I don't really feel that way, but I guess I am. I used to say I dance, but I didn't say I was a dancer. I never claimed that as sort of a word that identified me. I think there is, am I fully worthy to be representing this art form? And it was sort of after a certain period of time dancing with Exit 12 where people sort of said, like, you are a dancer. Like, you need to start saying you're a dancer. That is what you are. And so he and I talked a lot about that, like claiming of the identity and embracing that.
A couple years into Dancing with Exit 12, my brother Nick joined the Army. And so all of a sudden I did have this extremely personal, deep connection to our work. And it was sort of my way of being able to talk to him about his experiences. So he went through boot camp, and then he deployed twice to Afghanistan. And of course, I could not at all relate to any of his experiences, but at least we could have a conversation of, oh, I've heard this story from some veterans that I danced with, and maybe that's something like you've experienced, and we could have this sort of dialogue back and forth. Over the years, we've worked with a lot of veterans in a lot of different contexts. One particular experience that really stands out for me is we were doing a workshop in Washington, D.C., and there was a woman, female veteran, that came to our dance workshop in her wheelchair, and she did the entire hour-long movement workshop from her wheelchair. And it was incredible to me to see her willingness to embrace her limitations and bypass them by far, by also sharing some of her stories of her experiences in the military and putting those to movement. And so for me, that was just fascinating to see somebody so open to trying something new and not feeling afraid of that. Moments like that and other conversations with veterans helped me to be able to speak to my brother in a more sensitive way, and also not just my brother but other veterans as well, that to be able to connect with them or give an example of a past conversation or things like that, or oh, we've heard something similar. It just gives you context for other conversations, which has been helpful. So my name is Taylor Gordon, and I'm a dancer and a dance teacher, Pilates instructor, choreographer based in New York City. I am 5'4", pretty short. I have long brown hair that gets very curly and very frizzy. I am, I guess, built pretty petite, but I like to think I'm strong. Yeah, I have brown eyes, and yeah, for not being able to see me, that's good. The military in my family has not been super prominent. My grandfather on my dad's side was in the Army, and he lived in Germany during World War II, was serving in Germany as a medic in World War II. But other than that, we don't have a very strong connection to the military. I think probably my great-grandfather had served just like everybody else's, but we didn't have a very strong connection to the military at the time that I joined Exit 12 Dance Company. I dance because I have to, especially in the pandemic time that we're in. It makes you realize what is essential to your own life besides just essential to the world. And for me, it is essential that I dance. Can't not do it. It's something that I've done my entire life. It's something that keeps me sane and keeps me physically motivated and emotionally motivated. Yeah, I dance because I have to. I think why dance for all of us is a non-verbal art form, and I think not that it's easy to share anything through dance, but I think it's a lot more accessible to share difficult things through movement instead of through words.
Hi, my name is Lisa. I'm an artist and a dance teacher. I have red hair. I'm currently wearing a white cable knit sweater, one of my favorite looks, and I'm average height. So I started dancing when I was quite young. I was a toddler. I loved movement. I loved dancing around the living room, kitchen, everywhere in the house. Drove my parents crazy. So my parents enrolled me in ballet lessons. It seemed like the natural thing since I loved moving around, and ballet had a lot of structure. It was great. I loved it. I had recently discovered that this dream of mine to be a ballet dancer in a company and be in the corps de ballet and be a swan, it wasn't what I thought it would be in terms of being fulfilled. Another element that possibly played into that was my boyfriend at the time was deployed to Fallujah. So as you can imagine, you're in a ballet rehearsal and whatnot, and my mind is somewhere else. It's halfway across the world thinking that the US is at war right now, and this is what I'm doing. I'm, doing bourrées for, 16 counts and then changing my port de bras.
My name is Andrew Harper. I am 5'10". I am not as skinny now as I was a year ago, but I feel very strong. My hair was blonde when I was young, and it still has remnants of that, although most people might say that I'm a brunette. I grew a mustache last year, and that's become a signature look for me, so we're holding on to that. I don't feel as though I resemble anyone in particular, although I feel sometimes people that I meet for the first time will say that I look really familiar to them. So I suppose I have one of those like generic white people faces, white man, blondish, Nordic, maybe not too distinctive. The best way to describe myself in terms of how I see myself is as just as an artist. It has at times in my life been about dance as my primary artistic outlet, and then sometimes it's choreography, sometimes it's painting or designing clothes or making things around my house. But I think if I describe myself, I think that is linked to what I feel my purpose in the world is, and I think that what makes me excited about being alive is making things and seeing nothing turn into something and having a hand in that process.
My name is Adrienne de la Fuente. I have been told that I look like Charlotte from Sex and the City, and once was actually mistaken for the actress in a building that she lives in New York City while tutoring. So initially I took some creative ballet movement classes when I was 5, and I absolutely hated it. Kind of restarted and revisited dance when I was 9 because my sister had started taking some classes. I went to San Francisco every weekend, which was a 2-hour drive from where my parents live. So my family's background in the military is interesting because it sort of predates my existence. But through Exit 12, I have started to unpack a lot of its influence in my life. So my father was going to be drafted for the Vietnam War, and instead of getting drafted, he said, I'm going to preempt that, I'm going to join the reserves. And after finishing his master's, he actually decided to go active duty, became a captain in the military and the army, and I realized how much kind of the culture of the military has been part of my own family upbringing. I think there's a lot of things about structure that have come from that experience for them. I think I always take with me the power of art, and that it was always something, like dance for me was something that I did because I either enjoyed aspects of it, or I don't know when at one point I could say I love dance itself, but I didn't really see its value in the world. I thought if you were going to do something valuable, you'd become a doctor, or you work for an NGO. But I do always take from each performance the reason, like why dance matters, and when used correctly is so transformative. So I think it's probably the power of dance to heal.
When my boyfriend returned home from combat, he was completely different man. The man I fell in love with was this sensitive, artistic, really outgoing, happy-go-lucky guy. And the man who came home was quite angry and lost, but in a very, I don't have a better word for it, in a very angry way, without any sort of clear path forward. And I saw this struggle, and I tried to reconcile it with the artist that I knew that left for war, and the man who came home with that war in his head and in his body. And it got to the point where I didn't know if we were going to work or not as a couple, but it was important that I try to help in whatever way I could. So I sat down with him and asked, what is it that you want to do? Right? If you don't have any limits, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And he said, I'd start a dance company. And I think he expected me to laugh or something, but I mean, that seemed quite logical to me at the time. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to jump in and be like, okay, how do we start a ballet company or a dance company? One of the more recent performances was actually around this time last year on the Intrepid. So the memorable part of that performance wasn't necessarily the performing itself. It was right before we began. We were organizing the program order, making sure we had enough time for costume changes. And all of a sudden, we realized that, we need someone else to speak. And I did not want to do it whatsoever. To actually talk about that experience, to talk about where it came from a place of looking at, my boyfriend at the time who needed some sort of change, who needed a path of purpose and healing, to where it is now. I don't think I've ever had to sit down and talk about it. And the idea of talking to the audience to that extent, that was something that A, terrified me, B, made me really uncomfortable. And when I go to speak, it's like everything in my mind just goes blank. So I was terrified of going up there, speaking to that audience for our first time being produced on the Intrepid and being like, I have nothing. So that performance really sticks out in my mind because I had to get up on that stage and talk about my reflections of Román coming back from war. That was definitely a milestone for me personally, to be able to speak about my experience, even in a small way. And for me, that was definitely the first of what I think is going to have to continue, of me talking about my experience.
I think when I dance Mother from Sometimes Silence, there's this scene where the mother is miming her sons who are now deployed in Afghanistan, and kind of this moment where she, says like, oh, here's the son over here, here's the son over here, and then they are gone. I think when I dance that's kind of a reliving of that reality and that experience.
An experience that consistently has stood out to me, Sometimes Silence, is a piece about two sons that go to war, and it's basically, I would say it's choreographed by a mother of two sons, and so it's primarily from her experience. And I think that's a piece that's difficult to rehearse. I don't know, Sometimes Silence is one of those things where I think when I perform that piece, I suddenly become very aware of what that means to people to the audience, to people that have had that experience and how that resonates with them. I also am very aware of what that piece means to Adrienne, and I think knowing what that means to her and I feel like it becomes an emotional moment between us as well, which is one of the beautiful things about Exit 12 is the personal connections. But when you can share that experience with another performer, like that is really meaningful and deep.
I had a long FaceTime conversation with Omar. He shared with us lots of stories, but particularly a couple stories around his that were about him being a gay Black man in the military and what that has meant for him and what that has meant for his family. And it just was incredible to me the way that he was able to express some really difficult things through not only his words, but the way that he spoke. So he was actually very animated through movement, even though he wasn't dancing, and he's not a dancer, but he had a lot of rhythmical things that he would say or do with his hands, and a lot of body language and a lot of sort of movement on his FaceTime camera. And I really enjoyed sort of seeing his enthusiasm for sharing his story and go through with that and share some meaningful things. But certain things that he said were just really stand out. The jingle of the dog tags near his heart always reminded him of his strength. So because he had served and because he had survived all the hardships that he's been through, even when he just walks down the street now, he feels really empowered because of that experience. And so the dog tags on his jingling by his heart just remind him of that and allow him to feel like he can do anything.
I spoke with Omar and about his poem Dear Mama, but it was that level of trust and connection and honesty, and looking at our two very different places that we're coming from, an Air Force veteran and a dancer, and being able to connect about the human experience through art. I could spend days doing that.
Most people don't consider the veteran experience or the fact that we're in war constantly on a daily basis. It is very easy to sidestep that almost entirely. I think one of the things that's amazing about Exit 12 is that it creates a way that is approachable to bridge this extremely intense experience that a portion of our country goes through as a veteran, and the civilian who gets the luxury of never thinking about it to encounter it and build empathy. And if you stick around long enough, you start to see how much similarity we can have with the veteran experience, even though it's not our own.